Just a short time ago, the White House announced the president tested negative for COVID-19 after coming in contact with a Brazilian official who was infected.
The National Health Service in England has announced 10 further deaths of patients who tested positive for coronavirus.
A new reality. Major retailers temporarily closing shop, including Apple and outdoor gear label Patagonia. All embarking U.S. cruises stopped, a request from the president himself. Too late for Grand Princess passenger Chris Hall and his wife Nikki, now in forced quarantine.
We're fenced in completely, trying to find food. This guy over here behind me, he's supposed to be keeping an eye on everybody.
In Boston and New York, Sunday service canceled. St. Patrick's Cathedral, Mass to be celebrated over live stream. Prayers to stop the spread of the coronavirus now happening in private.
If what we're hearing from Professor Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, confirm that 10 further patients have tested positive, have died, that would be 21 people. We just haven't had that sort of figure in the UK
what
before.
Sort of
We've had single deaths, and then that went to double deaths, and we were told to expect the numbers to rise, but we just haven't seen a doubling in the number of people who've actually died.
In casual attire, the president this evening delivered the news airlines here have been dreading. The UK and Ireland now included in his European travel ban.
They've had a little bit of activity, unfortunately, so we're going to be looking at that. We actually already have looked at it, and that is going to be announced.
We just completed.
That formal announcement was to come just moments later, the Vice President clarifying the devastating details.
As the President just suggested, all of our health experts presented information, made a unanimous recommendation to the President that we suspend all travel from the UK and Ireland. That will be effective midnight, Monday night, Eastern Standard Time.
Touch of the elbow is as close as you'll get to the doyen of infectious disease doctors at the moment. In a rare broadcast interview, Peter Piot, who helped to discover the Ebola virus, said COVID-19 is far more of a threat.
Oh, this is much, much worse than Ebola. Ebola requires very close contact for transmission. People are very scared of it, but frankly, it is usually very contained. We have some exceptions, but it's because it's a respiratory transmitted virus. That makes it so worrisome, and it's very infectious because there's so much virus in the throat. So this is literally something you can catch by just talking to someone.
They were just trying to restock, but I think there's just in general quite a bit of anxiety. Not far from where I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., in the state of Maryland, they just canceled school for the next 2 weeks. Universities and colleges across the country canceling schools as well. Right now, we're a little concerned about the timing of a deal between Nancy Pelosi and the House and the Trump administration as to how to move forward with coronavirus. They're disagreeing over the issue of paid family and sick leave. So lots of anxiety. We're getting mixed messages from the government. So it's a very concerning time.
Concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic. Pandemic is not a word to use lightly or carelessly. It's a word that, if misused, can cause unreasonable fear.
In the last few minutes, we've also been hearing from the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. His wife has tested positive for coronavirus. He is now in isolation. Let's have a listen to him.
We're thinking about all the families across the country who've received the same diagnosis. But we're in good hands. We have full confidence in Canada's health officials and professionals. This means that, upon my doctor's recommendation, I will remain in self-isolation for 14 days.
I feel very tired, extremely tired, as if I've just run a marathon, and I'm still not 100%. I've still got a sore throat, I still have a headache, and climbing up a flight of stairs is like climbing Everest. But otherwise, I'm rapidly getting better, and I suspect by Monday, Tuesday, I'll be more or less back to normal. The first 2 days are pretty grim, very high temperature, sore throat, headache, feeling like the flu, but much worse. And these 2 days have been just gentle recovery. As I said, as if I've just been running a marathon. I feel exhausted.
At LAX, you can take a look behind me. We're seeing periodic arrivals of groups of people that have just traveled back. And just so you know, Americans who've returned from Europe in the past 14 days are being funneled through 13 different airports, including here at LAX. As they come in and they go through customs, they're then asked a series of health questions. They're also given some details about the coronavirus, any precautions they need to take, symptoms to look out for. Then they're sent on with a directive to go ahead and self-quarantine on their own for a couple of weeks. Now, President Trump spoke about the travel ban on Friday during his emergency declaration. Of course, now the European ban includes the UK and Ireland, and potentially could include domestic air travel as well.
Specifically from certain areas, yes, we are. And we're working with the states, and we are considering other restrictions, yes.
Reach and penetration of the coronavirus pandemic opened up a new front today, with more of the world's biggest sporting contests cancelled or postponed. Much of the big football events in Europe have been put on hold. That includes the English Premier League and the Champions League as well. That announcement coming just in the past hour. Well, India's Cricket Premier League and the start of the Formula One season have also been suspended. Elsewhere, stock markets in Europe picked up on some of the ground they'd lost in Thursday's huge falls. Asian markets, though, continued to slide. And Italy, the country worst hit in Europe, there the number of dead has reached more than 1,000 people in the past 24 hours.
The World Health Organization says Europe is now the epicenter of the global coronavirus pandemic. The news emerged as organised sport, both professional and amateur, across much of the UK, came to a standstill because of the outbreak.
This is Italy, one of the most advanced healthcare systems in the world. In the northern city of Brescia, they're reduced to treating patients in warehouses and tents because of coronavirus. Italy has the worst outbreak by far in Europe, but other countries are catching up.
Europe has now become the epicenter of the pandemic, with more reported cases and deaths than the rest of the world combined, apart from China.
Denmark announced it is closing its borders to foreigners from tomorrow. Nearly a dozen European countries have now imposed border controls. In Spain, a state of emergency will come into effect tomorrow, which could see restrictions on movement. The Foreign Office has advised against all but essential travel to Madrid and some other regions. France announced it is limiting gatherings to no more than 100 people. The Eiffel Tower and other key monuments and museums will close. A shutdown of schools will last at least 2 weeks. All of Europe wants to avoid scenes like these in Italy, but the UK's approach is in stark contrast to measures taken elsewhere.
At the moment, my daily work is changing continuously, because right now I'm in an operating theater that we closed last week and transformed it into a COVID ICU. And this is the second block out of 3 in my hospital. So now we have a general ICU that is clean with no COVID patient. But now we canceled all the elective and non-urgent surgery, and we are using 2 other theaters for COVID patients. So we are expecting a surge in the next days, and we all hope that this surge will not reach the intensity of Lombardy. We are probably 9 to 10 days behind Lombardy, and the intensity that this epidemic reached in the area around Milan was really hit very hard the healthcare system. So many hospitals are nearly collapsing, and the forecast for the next 10 to 15 days is even worse. So this situation changed completely our lives in little more than 1 week. We are working very hard with extraordinary efforts in order to increase our ICU capacity and hospital capacity, with also high dependency units working a lot in order to increase availability for patients. but we are not sure that will be enough. So my suggestion is that you get prepared as soon as you can, because once you start admitting severe ICU patients, it's probably too late for social distancing, isolation and lockdown.
The government is planning a virtual wartime footing in an effort to try and stop the spread of the deadly coronavirus. Its plans in the coming weeks could include such drastic action as putting people into quarantine and requisitioning property to help cope with possibly huge numbers of patients.
I had the cold, just a common cold. My nose was stuffy. I had ear problems, sinus problems, that sort of thing. But then you get better before you get worse. So I was getting better, and that's when I got hit with the flu. Now, I've had the flu half a dozen times, and this was probably the worst I've felt with that. It really was quite bad. It wasn't life-threatening, but I did feel terrible. With the flu, I was stuck in bed. I had a headache. I just generally feeling unwell. I was getting better from the flu, and that's when I got hit with pneumonia. Now, the pneumonia, I've never had that before, so that was quite serious for me, and that's the point I went to hospital.
And when you had the pneumonia, just describe to us, and we've all heard the word, but none of us, or most of us, don't know what it feels like. What did that feel like to you?
Yeah, so pneumonia, it feels like you've only got 20% of your lungs working. You can't take a full breath like you need to. If you stand up and go and walk into the kitchen, you're out of breath because you just can't get that breath. It also sounds like you're breathing through a bag. Your breath is very crackly and croaky. It generally is not a fun thing at all, and it can be very, very serious.
Tonight, the president's task force announcing new restrictions at a surprise Saturday press conference.
If you don't have to travel, I wouldn't do it.
All travel from the UK and Ireland banned as of Monday.
Americans in the UK or Ireland can come home. Legal residents can come home.
Bans already in effect for travelers from Europe, Iran, and China. Visits to nursing homes temporarily restricted to protect the country's most vulnerable. And a warning, the worst is yet to come.
We have not reached our peak. Now, we will see more cases.
Part of an all-out push to stop the deadly pandemic from spiraling. Confirmed cases in every state except West Virginia, and the first death in New York City. Nationwide, over 50 dead so far. In Seattle, hospitals strained and short on supplies. Elective surgeries postponed until at least the end of March. Dr. Alexander Adami tells me the system's buckling. He's worried about the amount of undiagnosed COVID-19.
I am not scared for myself, but I'm very worried about what's going to happen to the patients that I'm taking care of.
You're already starting to run out of supplies.
They are already starting to ration supplies here. There just isn't enough to keep going for very long.